Admin to code day 14. So with this one, I started live coding it and recording myself, and then I just ran into all kinds of. I was just wrestling with my tools the whole time, and I ran into all kinds of trouble parsing the input, and so I ended up just scrapping that video. And so this is more of a recap after the fact. So once I found the parsing to be a little bit. I think it was mostly just because of this version of Kotlin that I'm using. I'm using like the very latest one, and I think there was just some compiler issue with that playing well with IntelliJ, and that was mostly what the problem was. I actually didn't find that parsing it was that bad once I got that stuff figured out. And then the problem itself is pretty straightforward. So essentially what we're doing here is we have this code here that they give us, and there's only really one command in this language, and it's you're either setting a mask to a value, and then you're setting a memory address to a value. The thing is, prior to setting the memory address to that value, you need to apply this mask to it. So this decimal 11, you convert it to binary, you apply the mask, and then you ignore the x's, and if there's a 1 in the mask, you ignore whatever is in the value, and you just set the output to 1. So whether the value is 1 or whether it's 0, you're going to be setting it to 1. You're also going to be setting anything that's 0 in the mask to 0. Initially I thought I could maybe use some binary, like bitwise operations here, but you really can't, because you would think that maybe like if you did an OR operation here between the 0 and the 1, that would do it. But the problem is when you have this is not an OR here. 1 or 0 would be 1. So that you really have to overwrite whatever values. You can't really use any bitwise operations to do that. So what I did for part 1 was I created this class called bitmask. And it is just kind of a wrapper around a string. You pass in a string, and then when you apply it to a given input, which can be a long or a string, I have this overloaded method. It basically just takes the long, converts it to a string, and then pads the start with zeros. So you end up with something like this here. And so it goes through each item in the array of this string. And I can get rid of this because the compiler knows it's able to infer the type. So I start out with an output that's empty. I go through each value. So I start here at 0, and I say, okay, this is the value of the mask really. So if the value is the ignore character, which is x, then I just take the value of whatever if it's not equal to the ignore character, you overwrite it with the mask value, and then ultimately you append that to the output with this plus equals here. Otherwise, you just use whatever the input is at that index. That means it is the ignore character. And so you just go through, and then you apply it to each one of these. If it's an x, it's going to ignore it and just pass those zeros straight through, or if they're ones. And then if it runs into this 1, it's going to take that one and add that to the output. And then you just do a output.toLong, and then use this radix of 2 because it's a binary number. And then that's really it. So all you have to do to solve this is, let's see, it's the day 14 test. The solver just looks like this. It goes through, it does a test. The parsing checks if there's a line that starts with mask, and then if so, it will set the mask to this. Because if you'll notice in the input, there are multiple times where you're setting the mask here. The example that they give you, you're only setting it once, but in the input, you're actually setting it multiple times. So we're setting this mask. Otherwise, we are parsing it into this command, and this command is this, I just created this data structure that has the location and the value. So the location would be this memory location here, and then the value that we're setting it to. And then you take the value, and I did that with a regex. So with regexes, you can use these groups. So these parentheses indicate that this is one group that you're searching for, and this parentheses here, this is group 2. Group 0 is always the full input string. So what I did was I took this regex, applied it to this line, and then I took the group 1 for the memory address, and then the group 2 is the value, and then I parsed that into a command. So for each command that you come across, you're going to set this memory, which is a map of ints here. It's a mutable map, or longs, I guess. And you have to use longs because this number that they give you is 36-bit, and the int in Kotlin only goes up to 32 bits. So that's one thing to keep in mind. He throws a little bit of a curveball there. So we convert this to we convert this to a command, and then we apply the mask to this command value, and then we set the location of that memory address to that. And then it's pretty straightforward. Then you just take this memory, and then you take all the values, and then you sum them up. And that's what they're looking for. They want the sum of the values at every memory address. So pretty straightforward overall. If you have any questions, I have a link to my repo in the description of the video, and then feel free to post any questions that you have in the comments. So this one was pretty straightforward. I liked it. After I got through all the mess with all the parsing stuff, and I guess the other thing is, like, I'm not really familiar with bitwise operations in Java or Kotlin, but you really don't need them. You can just go through the string, and I found that this was able to solve it pretty quickly. So yeah, thanks for watching.